Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. I'm John Bartley Boykin, Director of the International Trade Division at the Mississippi Development Authority. And on behalf of our state, we are very pleased to continue with our first cycle of webinars on Latin America, a very important region for Mississippi's international trade. In this opportunity, we will focus on Panama, a country that holds a trade promotion agreement with the United States since 2012. As one of the most outstanding economies in Central America, Panama is a very important trade partner for the state of Mississippi. During the last 5 years, Mississippi exported almost $6.5 billion to the country. Considering the effects that the pandemic has had on different economies and industries, this virtual conference will provide Mississippi companies a perspective on the current context for doing business in Panama, the challenges and opportunities that the economy and the industry in this country are facing due to the pandemic, along with the perspectives from the Panama Canal Authority, a symbol of international trade and the connection between the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. For us, it is also very important to mention that the following webinar has been organized and coordinated along with the Panama American Chamber of Commerce. So we want to thank them very, very much. So now I will begin introducing our first speaker, Mr. Glenn John, Regional Advisor and Innovation Partner, Kpmg Panama. Glenn is a Regional Advisory and Innovation Partner for the Kpmg Central America and Dominican Republic offices. He has 27 years of experience as a business advisor in a wide range of segments, including government, logistics and distribution, transportation, aviation, banking and insurance, and retail sales. Glenn specializes in digital business strategy, digital transformation, disruptive technologies and innovation, business model design and operating models, systems implementation, project and program management. So Glenn, it's a pleasure to have you participating today, and we want to welcome you.
Thank you, JB. It's a pleasure for me and an honor to share our take and my perspective on the economic outlook and challenges of this fascinating country. I had the opportunity to live in Panama for almost 12 years now, and I must say there's never been a dull moment. This has hit us pretty hard, but nevertheless, as we all know, all crises will come eventually to an end. The question is, what are you doing and what will you do and how will you go back and reflect to what you have done during the course of this very, very difficult period. So I'm going to be spending approximately 15 minutes with you today, where I'm going to take you to some of the economic outlooks that Kpmg is conducting. As we all know, this is a very, very fluid period. So any projection, again, has to be taken into the context that what we know and what we currently are seeing happening across the globe. So our team based in our global economics team has taken the liberty to use various models and kind of project what's going to happen on a global scale. And the reason why I'm starting on a global scale is because Panama, as you will see from the various other panelists, is really within a more regional or even a more global player in that sense. So for us, it's very, very important to be able to understand what's happening on the global scale, what's happening on the regional scale, and what's happening with our most important trade partners, such as the US. So as you can see, on a global scale, what we have done here is really try to, as much as possible, use input from the IMF, but also the National Institute for Economic and Social Research to kind of project what's going to happen as we go through this pandemic. And most likely on a global scale, we'll see some kind of recovery going back to where we were, let's say, in the fourth quarter of 2019, in approximately 3 to 4 periods. So eventually around the third or the fourth quarter of 2021, we'll probably see GDP getting back to the level it was in 2019. If you go even closer to our region, Latin America, this is an aggregate of information from the largest economies. So this is Brazil, Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, and Chile within the confinement of this projection. Panama is not included, very, very small country, as you know. So we're very much dependent on what's happening in the other parts of the world. So, but most likely Panama will follow some similar pattern. Probably we will be able to recover a little bit faster because we are already parting from a very positive economic growth. Even though we were at a 3.5% economic growth in 2019, we will be affected, obviously. And the idea is that we will be able to recover within a year or maybe 2 years' time. Now, all these models, again, are models, and therefore you have to take your own measurements and have your own judgment. And the most important thing you can do right now is to really educate yourself and see what's happening in other parts of the world where the pandemic seems to be under control. The likes of New Zealand, Singapore, Australia, and even China. China very recently indicated a growth of approximately 5% already. And that means that, again, it all depends on what are the measurements and the stimulus that the government has taken in place and how effective are those measurements. But other than that, if you go to a much more deeper dive and you look at the various industries, because at the end of the day, we're all business people. So for us, it's very important to understand how our industry, our subsegment is being affected. And what we have done is we have analyzed the various, again, as consultants, we like to think in quadrants. So this is a kind of an idea of what's going to happen per each quadrant. So starting from the upper left corner, you see the hard reset. This is the industries that have been probably the most affected by a total economic lockdown, a crisis that started as a health crisis and that has now been unfortunately converted into an economic crisis and even a social crisis. So, again, we have seen already the horror stories on the hotel industries, again, with the energy sector being affected, airlines, etc. Then we have the other sectors that are probably already subject to some kind of transformation. However, the pandemic has accelerated that. That's what we call the transform to reemerge. And also in the case of Panama, we see a number of these businesses, industries, trying to reinvent themselves for the 21st century. How do I become much more client-centric? How do I leverage technology the most? How do I create a model that is scalable and does not require too much of a upfront CapEx investment? Our banking industry, our agriculture and transportation industry, and I know that my fellow panelists will be able to talk much more about transportation and logistics and the impact. This is basically an industry that to a certain extent has been affected. However, they will probably be able to recover pretty quickly. So this is the so-called V-shaped recovery. And that's the modified business as usual. And then we have industries that are doing very, very well. It's the Amazons of the world. It's the online retailers, but primarily also in life sciences and medical supplies. We've seen stellar growth from the likes of Philips and other companies that are specifically targeting the healthcare industry. So we strongly believe that in the case of Panama, as we move forward and we try to redefine our role in this new reality, particularly it's going to be around agribusiness or agri-tech, transportation, logistics, and probably life sciences, again, looking at those growth areas as well. So we've been through this, and you've probably seen this slide or some form of this slide before. This is really showing how we progress as an economy, as a society, as a country through this pandemic, and the reaction, recession, recovery, and new reality. And I will try to spend some time on defining for us what is this new reality, because at the end of the day, we know that this crisis will end and that eventually we will get to a new reality. It's up to us to define our role in this new reality. But for us to do that, we have to understand what is that new reality and what does it look like and what are some of the questions we need to address. So understanding the new reality, you have to look at what in fact is the business impact. I'm not going to go to each one of these elements, but it gives you an idea of what's happening on a business level. You know, how is cash flow affected? How am I changing and pivoting to a much more digital and digitally enabled economy? How do I go about creating a more effective operating model that is not just tied to a specific provider or distributor, but has the flexibility to really cope with situations such as this pandemic, where both demand and supply has been affected at the same time? How do I build a more resilient business? And how do I create a more reliable supply chain? Now, why is this important? Because at the end of the day, for Panama, it's very, very important for us to define the role we want to play as a player and as an economy within this context. And understanding the business reality will allow us to provide the right incentives and the right value proposition to address these concerns. So when we look at defining the new reality, there are really 8, I would say, key questions and key changes that we're seeing. This is part of our role as Kpmg to look into these signals. One of the things that I'm directly involved within our global network is on innovation and how these signals affect our business and the businesses of our clients. We already know that the ways of working has changed. I mean, people and companies are already saying that there's no need for you to come back to the office. And that will have a massive change on how we go about sourcing resources, how we compete. And all of a sudden, it's really not that relevant for you to be living in a specific country to be able to provide services outside of your country. So this notion of being able to collaborate is a big change. Our labor force has been subject to change. The introduction of robotics, machine learning, and intelligent automation, or AI, artificial intelligence, will have a massive change on our labor force. And as you go down the list, you end up with the notion that we're kind of going back to a two-polar global economy, where Asia, dominated primarily by China, and the Western, dominated primarily by the US, are going to take a very dominant role in how to move forward as a global economy. So the deglobalization or the regionalization will have and will bring tremendous opportunities for Panama. The reason being is that we have always been very, very neutral and open for business. And our position, our geographic position, our role, our brand, and our ability to quickly pivot is going to be critical in a deglobalized world. The tendencies and whatever happens after the election in the US, this is something that probably will remain a factor. The deglobalization is something that we have to take into consideration. There are two additional elements that I want to stress here, and that is the notion of trust and the notion of disruptive technology. And for sake of time, I'm just going to focus on the trust element. We all are suffering from a trust crisis. Fake news, what is true, and how do we comply as a society? Those are going to be very, very critical questions that we need to address. And I think in the case of Panama, it's not different. I think as a society, as an economy, we will have to pivot and embrace this notion and this need to be as transparent and as trustworthy of a partner as possible. And I think we're doing a great job. And part of these webinars will allow us to share these shared ideas as well with you. So it's not all bad news. I think one of the good things and the good news of Panama is our per capita growth. This has been stellar and highest in the region. We have surpassed Chile in terms of per capita growth. And this shows that the economy has grown very, very rapidly. And whenever you have this type of growth in a very short period of time, you put a lot of stress on your both your government institutions, but also on the society as well. And these are some of the challenges that we face. One of the key challenges that we face is, even though we have seen this economic growth, is income distribution. And this is some of the things that we have to address, because we all know that due to due to the lack of income distribution, this will create or can create and result in civil unrest. We already seen this across the world. So this is something that we have to clearly address very, very shortly. How do we get to a society which is much more equal, and where the income is distributed, and much more importantly, people are given the opportunity to also participate in this growth, in this potential that we have as an economy. Another challenge is our competitiveness. This is a new world. The world has changed and has been changing. And as a society, we also need to change and adapt and become much more competitive. And you'll hear from our fellow panelists ideas on how we can become much more competitive. But this is something that as a society we'll need to address as a whole. How do we become much more competitive in a new world? So in closing, a couple of comments around what my take is and where do we need to head as a society. So again, we need to quickly pivot our economy and reinvent ourselves, because at the end of the day, the new reality is here to stay. And we have to show a long-term vision. This is an infinite game. And I'm going to steal a quote from Simon Sinek, great author. His recent book is The Infinite Game. I really recommend you to read it. And they talk about the concept of existential flexibility. How do I reinvent myself to play a long-term and infinite game? It's a very different type of exam question that you need to address and answer when you're playing an infinite game versus a short-term play. Historically, Panama has been very resilient. I mean, this is a country that has faced adversities before, have been able to surpass them. And I think this crisis will also be one that we will be able to achieve. The most important thing is that it will require a collective and focused effort. And in order for us to focus, we need to clearly understand not only what are the risks and opportunities, but more importantly, how do they interconnect? What are some of these clusters? What are some of these events when supply, demand, political unrest, civil unrest, supply chains being affected, all come together and they create risks that were unseen before, or create opportunities that were not tapped in before? I think those are fundamental challenges and questions that we need to address in a very, very short time frame. With that said, again, I want to thank JB, Panama, Amcham, and the American Chamber, of course, for inviting me and for having me this morning with you. Hopefully, this presentation gave you an idea of where we're heading as an economy, and I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Glenn. We really do appreciate you taking the time to give us your economic outlook for Panama, as well as the challenges for the Panamanians during this, I suppose, post and current COVID world that we're in right now. So thank you very, very much, Glenn.
You're welcome.
All right, I'm going to move on to our next speaker now. Mr. Jorge Barnett. Jorge has obtained a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from the Technology University of Panama in 1999, a master's degree in industrial engineering from Georgia Institute of Technology in 2004, as well as a master's in English and a PhD degree in logistics and supply chain management from the MIT International Logistics Program. Jorge has nearly a decade of experience through diverse roles in the fields of manufacturing, project management, and logistics. We want to welcome Jorge today. He's going to be discussing the challenges for the main Panamanian industries and upcoming projects announced by the government. So thank you, Jorge, for joining us today, and we look forward to your presentation. I see you have a number of degrees, so I feel like you've probably spent most of your life in school. So so we're glad to have you.
Yeah, thanks, JB. Yeah, I spent my whole life learning, and it's always been a very important thing for me to understand that we never stop learning. And if we get something from this pandemic is that many of us have to reinvent ourselves, companies, businesses, as individuals. You know, I'm right now sitting at home having this talk with you and sharing it with people abroad, and I think that's very valuable. We're understanding new ways of doing business, and as such, we can ground this on how companies are redesigning their networks, how countries are reimagining the way they approach foreign investment and how they offer new services to companies abroad. Obviously, I thank all of you for inviting me today. I want to state my personal bias. As you mentioned, I'm a researcher, therefore I'm a scientist. And my main interest is on how global networks are designed. And by this, I mean, how did these global supply chains structure and restructure themselves, adapting to the way the dynamics of supply and demand shift. The context of COVID actually has had a great impact on this. I'm pretty sure every researcher in this field is going nuts right now, trying to figure out new things to incorporate into their models, because as much as we understand how disruptions affect, COVID has been a weird monster of sorts. It's a dual disruption. It hits supply and it hits demand. Generally, if we have a recession, it's more a demand-based disruption. When there's like an earthquake, as has happened before in Asia, which has affected global supply chains, it tends to be a supply-side disruption. But COVID affected not only the way we produce things, but also the way we consume things. And it has shifted the ground underneath the very fabric of how our economic system is built. And in some way, it has exposed its flaws. And by flaws, I don't mean that it was wrongly designed. It just wasn't resilient enough in some lines of business. Single sourcing has been something that has plagued companies because looking to compete in cost. And these companies have been hit the hardest. Panama has traditionally been a logistics hub. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about has to do with this. But Panama is not only a logistics hub. Its economy is anchored a lot around a lot of different elements, a lot of moving parts. And many of these, as Glenn mentioned, I like to borrow from Glenn that what he said, a lot of our business is actually regional. I like to bring up, whenever I speak to people from abroad, I like to bring up the fact that our coat of arms, one of our national emblems, it states explicitly pro mundi beneficio, which means for the benefit of the world. It doesn't say for the benefit of Panama, it says for the benefit of the world. Our very country was founded on the principle that we serve the world, and our economy is also anchored around that concept. As such, a lot of our business is regional. We serve Latin America, we serve North America, we unite East and West. And of course, Ilya is gonna address a lot of that later, so I'm not gonna spoil any of the fun. But I do wanna bring up that because of that, elements like tourism, air travel, real estate in general, regional distribution and logistics, all of these are businesses that are not serving a country of 4 million people. They're serving a region of over 500 million people. And on top of this, many of these businesses are anchored around global chains or global economic systems or subsystems. Therefore, what tends to happen is that they are anchored around foreign direct investment. And as an example, Panama represents less than 10% of Central America's population, of the region of Central America. But we capture about over 50% of the foreign direct investment in Central America. So you could pretty much say that we tend to punch above our weight class when it comes to foreign direct investment. And this is, as I said, regional business. We're not working on a local economy. We work at the regional level. And this means that the crisis has hit some of these sectors differently than you would expect in other countries. So I'm going to address a few of those very quickly. I always, whenever I give a talk, I want to understand the people I'm talking to. I've never been to Mississippi. I have one friend in Mississippi. But I like to bring up a personal touch to those things. So, I'm going to mention three things that come from Mississippi people. First, I want to bring up Sam Cooke. He said, I don't know much about history. I don't know much about biology. And he also mentioned a lot of things he doesn't know about. And this defines the era in which we are right now. We're walking on very uncertain ground, and we know very little still about what's actually going to happen. We understand and we have a good intuition about what could happen, but it's a big could. It's not really, we don't know what's going to happen. We didn't know this was going to happen, and the way it has evolved has been very unpredictable, even for people studying it day to day. So this uncertain ground that we're walking on right now, it's very critical that we build good foundations so that whatever happens in the near future, if we have another situation like the one we're living, our supply chains are more resilient, our logistics hub, our banking hub, our service sector, and our economy itself are more resilient. We need to build more systems that are more capable to adapting to change. Thankfully, some of our subsectors are built like that. Logistics in particular was born because Panama offers resilience to regional chains. But in some way, our economies tend to not be as diversified as they could. We tend to specialize. Most countries do that. It's rational. But this has exposed us a little bit to these dynamic shifts. So, when you look at the air sector, the air business is a very important business in Panama. It has been hit the hardest due to international travel restrictions. We are a connecting hub for Latin America, but also for North America. So we connect North and South very strongly. And in cargo, we connect to Europe, for example. A lot of the goods that come from other parts of Latin America, they come through Panama, and then they're served towards Europe and other countries. So I think, when you look at that system, you realize that we were very exposed on the risk side due to international travel restrictions, but also because simply the economies are in a downturn right now because of what has been going on, and obviously people don't have money to spend. This is logical. So this conditions a lot the tourism sector. It conditions a bit less what we have as a business that we call regional headquarters. We have over 150 global companies that are in some way present in Panama, serving the entire region. And that's a number that grows every year. And this is because we have special investment regimes to attract such companies, and these global companies, they choose Panama because of the facility of air travel, because of a dynamic economy, because of a dollarized economy, which is very important, and also because a lot of their cargo was flowing through here. So having your people serve the markets from here is kind of a logical choice. It's a good complementary business. Now, this business has been hit because obviously everybody's working from home and many people return home. But we see this still as a good opportunity because in Panama, we have many companies that serve the entire region, the logistics of the entire region from here. We don't have to settle for cargo logistics. The knowledge component of logistics is also very important for us. Many global companies have control towers or global centers of excellence based in Panama. So this is because we have built logistics capabilities, not only on the infrastructure side, but also on the people side. We understand how to do it. So a lot of companies come here, not only to flow their cargo, but to manage their entire systems. Basically, position their companies here so they can serve the entire system, not only in Latin America, but also in other regions. So we have a dynamic air sector that has come to a halt. And we have just seen it reactivate this past week because the government has released some of the restrictions. But what we're looking at is that we still have a long way to go to restore the level of some of these industries, especially tourism. When you look at real estate and construction and all of these connected businesses, they have obviously also been hit hard. Mainly because local mobility restrictions condition a lot of this industry. Where we see a great opportunity is precisely because of regionalization. And I remember Glenn mentioned it as well. And I would like to frame it in terms of what Panama offers for enabling resilient supply chains that adapt to this regionalization process, to this nearshoring process. So I want to bring up Tennessee Williams, also from Mississippi, from Columbus, who said, time is the longest distance between two places. And this is, his intent obviously wasn't to bring up logistics, but I like to put it in terms of logistics because what really matters right now is the ability of supply chains to respond to shifts. And what Panama offers and the Panamanian Logistics Hub offers to companies from across the world is to be closer in time to all of their markets, minimizing their risk exposure from having local inventory in all these countries, but also from having a pre-positioned inventory only at the source. So all these companies that were doing single sourcing are now looking at having regional hubs, not only for distribution, but also for value-added manufacturing. You really want to postpone the customizing processes as much as possible. And e-commerce, a lot of the e-commerce movement is based on customization. People want more customized products. So what Panama tends to offer here is a hub that is closer. You can reach all of Latin America by air and all of the American continent by air, 7-8 hours. But you can also reach pretty much all of Latin America by sea in less than a week. And this seems like a lot, but in general, Europe is 2 weeks away. So being able to have a regional base in Panama allows you to shorten the time between your source and your destination market significantly. This saves a ton of money in inventory. We have done a lot of studies. We have a program where we do analysis for global firms that want to establish in Latin America. We do it for free. And part of it, what we do is we analyze the inventory impact of having a hub in the region, and we evaluate Panama versus other locations. And they tend to save about 15 to 25% in in-transit inventory and about 10 to 15% in safety stock inventory. This might not seem like much in some industries, but for industries like pharmaceuticals, for example, it's a lot of money. So what Panama offers is this, I like to call it proximity hub, but I also like to bring up the resiliency factor. We're not prone to natural disasters. We're not prone to other elements that affect other hubs. Therefore, we enable resiliency. And to kind of close, because I understand we have a time constraint, I would love to share a lot more. I would like to bring up a positive outlook. I think it's very important that we understand that the entire world is in a shift. We're shifting towards something else. We're looking at a stronger system design around e-commerce for local delivery, for example, but we're also looking at a more regionalized approach as to how firms look at their supply chains. So what I would like to bring up is the fact that a lot of where we think the future, from our perspective, at least from the work that we do with logistics, with companies, my approach would see more a focus on being closer to customers. Glenn mentioned customer-centric. For firms, this is not only about design, this is also about time to market and service time to consumers. Panama has a big strength on that. So there is significant investment on the logistics sector, on the special economic zones especially, around the Canal area. There's going to be significant investment in the upcoming years. This is not going to change. This is something that we have been seeing for the past few years. COVID is not going to change that. It just shifted it a couple of years into the future, but it's going to happen. And this is because this shift to nearshoring didn't start with COVID. It has been starting for a few years now. People understand risk a little bit better. We just needed something to accelerate the change, and this is going to accelerate it. So for Panama, this is a big opportunity, actually. When it comes to public infrastructure investment, there are some projects that are in the pipeline. There are huge projects related to water infrastructure, energy infrastructure. We have a new subway line that should be built in the upcoming years. It has already been awarded. A lot of local road networks are going to be improved. And this is all because we're looking at diversifying our economy and improving our export position. We tend to be an importing country. We want to export more. And part of that is connecting the rural parts of the country with the ports and exploiting our logistics cluster so that we can have our products reach other latitudes. On the energy side, we do see a great opportunity when it comes to clean renewable energy. And this is, pre and post pandemic, this is going to be the same. There's a great interest in cleaning our energy matrix, and we're already a highly renewable country. We have shifted some of production from coal to natural gas, and this has been a great thing in terms of strengthening our energy matrix, which is important not only for local people, it's also important for these regional firms that require reliable service. We also have very good telecommunications, and this is one of the sectors with greatest investment at the moment. And part of it is, we have 7 fiber optic cables. There's going to be a huge investment connecting one of the cool cables to Panama. So we're seeing a lot of focus on the digital industries. And there's a cluster of digital industries, local digital industries growing here that are trying to export these services. The nice thing about digital industries is that it doesn't matter where you are. You can just be global no matter where you're positioned. So these are the main sectors where I personally see great opportunity in the near future. And I want to leave the table open for the other speakers to expand on some of these, because I'm aware that they're going to expand on some of these, and the regulations that are going to allow them to facilitate commerce for people abroad. I want to close with a line from Elvis. I don't even need to mention his last name, where he said, "Ambition is a dream with a V8 engine." And the reason I close with this is we have a lot of ideas of how we want to improve our economies, but we have to be ambitious. We understand that we have to make significant changes to make all these things we have in mind come true. So we have to make the proper investments locally, but we also have to invest in our local workforce to make it more adaptable to the new technologies, so that we can attract more companies from the US, from Europe. Companies are highly diversified, highly technical, so that we can insert ourselves in their supply chains. Not only the distribution part, which we already do well, but also value-added logistics and manufacturing, which are highly dependent on technical skills. So that's something where we are trying to strengthen things so that all these dreams we have, we can actually make them come true. So I want to close with that, and I want to give the word back to you.
No, thank you so much, Jorge. That's it's incredibly kind for you to join us today and give us your perspective. Also want to add, you had mentioned that you had one friend from Mississippi. We'll consider, you have a couple of new friends from Mississippi as of today. So we'll welcome you anytime, and would love to host you and show you around. And I also want to add one more thing. I don't believe I actually mentioned it earlier, but for the audience that will be listening to this, Jorge Barnett is the managing director of Georgia Tech Panama Logistics Innovation and Research Center. So again, thank you so much, Jorge, for presenting to us today. And like I said, you're welcome to visit us in Mississippi anytime.
Thank you. Same for you, in fact.
Thank you. Look, I will move on to our next speaker. I hope I get this right. Illa Espino de Marota. So let's see. Illa obtained her marine engineer degree from Texas A&M in Galveston, Texas in May 1985, and in 1996, her master's in economic engineering from Old St. Mary University in Panama. She has worked for the Panama Canal for over 30 years on various positions, and on February of 2019, she was designated as Executive Vice President for Transit Business and responsible for all maritime operations, emergency response, dredging operations, maintenance of canals infrastructure, boating and rolling equipment, customer affairs, and marketing analysis. On January 1st of 2020, she was appointed Deputy Administrator of the Panama Canal. Today, Illa is going to be giving us the perspectives on the challenges of the Panama Canal and the canal's investment and modernization in upcoming projects as well. And I also want to add that I have traveled to many corners of the world. And about probably 2 years ago now, I visited the Panama Canal in my previous position. And I have to say that it is by far one of the most fascinating places I've ever visited. Absolutely beautiful, but incredibly fascinating how the canal operates on a daily basis, and everything that is going on in a day's time. So it's an absolute honor to have you join us today. And with that said, I want to welcome and open the floor up to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure. Thank you for the invitation. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Well, happy to be here. Here's a good picture of the expanded canal in the Pacific side, and you can see there's 4 nice vessels there waiting to continue their transit. So I'm glad you enjoyed your visit to the canal. It is fantastic, and I've been there for 35 years, and I still love going and seeing the ships every day. It's pretty fascinating. So what do? We transit about 13,000 vessels per year. About 72% of the transiting vessels do touch one of our ports, either in the Atlantic or the Pacific side. So about 252 million tons per year. And our leading countries, or the main users, are the United States is the number 1, China, Japan, Chile, South Korea, Mexico, Colombia, and Peru. Here's a picture of, you can see on the right-hand side, the original 1914 locks, which is a 2-lane lock. And then on the left side of the screen, you see the Neo Panamax, or the new ones that have been in operation for the last 4 years, inaugurated in 2016. So what are our competitors? Because we do have competitors. Our main route, or the most important route, let's say, for the canal, it's the east coast of the United States to Asia. And it's a 22-day route. One of our competitions to that route is going to the Suez Canal, which is 25 days. So it's a little bit longer to do that distance. Cape of Good Hope, when fuel prices are low and chartering rates are low, that's also another area that people do tend to go for the same route. It takes 30 days. And of course, the Trans-Pacific Intermodal US system that goes from Asia to the west coast of the United States, and then through rail to the east coast. So those are our main competitors. And one of the drivers for us to expand the canal was precisely that the ships were getting too big, and those routes were becoming more utilized and accessible, and we needed to expand to capture some of that. One of the challenges, we did have quite a few challenges, and we still do with COVID. One of the humanitarian things that we did through the COVID was allow the cruise vessels, the Sandam and the Rotterdam, to transit the canal, even though they had a lot of cases of COVID on board. And we actually managed to do a very unique transit with no further assistance than a single pilot transiting the vessels in the Panamax locks, in the Neo Panamax locks, even though they were Panamax vessels. So no tugboats, no line handlers. It was a unique operation. We did have a drop in cargo coming through the canal, and you can see there the lines in blue are the 2019. That was the ocean-going transit that came through the canal, and you can see the line in green, 2020, and you can see the drop. The COVID hit Panama in March. So April, May, June, July were our worst months. You can see August and September, a little bit of a recovery, but not even close to 2019 levels. The main commodities that were impacted by the Panama Canal, of course, even though we don't show here cruise vessels, it was one of the biggest, but it's not a very big segment because it's seasonal. So cruise vessels was impacted because tourism was impacted. LNGs, containerized cargo, which is our main user or more the biggest contributor. Grains and vehicles, automobiles, was also hit very, very hard during these pandemic years. And you can see there the comparison from 2019 and 2020. As far as ranking, number one user, United States. China has been number two. Japan number three. Chile number four. South Korea and Mexico have shifted around. Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, and Canada Ecuador and Canada have shifted around. So one of our, let's say, captive routes is the west coast of South America to Europe, or the west coast of South America to the east coast of the United States. Second to the east coast of USA to Asia. So these are our main country users. And if we look at the market segments, container, even though it's 19% of the transits, it has the biggest revenue, or the highest PCUMS. Dry bulk, we've seen an increase of dry bulk in the last month of October. We've gone from estimated arrivals of 32 vessels per day to 36, and a lot of it is driven by dry bulk. There's a lot of corn and soybean from the east coast of USA going to China. Tankers and chemicals, that was a market that I would say stayed the strongest during the pandemic. And the LPGs also. So we have LNG carriers. LNG, it's noted that it couldn't transit the canal before we expanded to the new lock. So now we have LNG, LPGs, we have car carriers. It's a good segment, not very big, but it has a good share in PCUMS. Passengers, general cargo, refrigerator, and other. And then we also have small vessels. So far, you can see there, container vessels is by far our biggest segment. Lower this. LPG being number two. This is only in the Neo-Panamax locks, the transits. But the Panama Canal charges per carrying capacity. So the bigger the vessel, the higher the tolls. And container vessels is the segment that pays the highest tolls. A 15,000 container could be paying about $1 million to transit the Panama Canal. So main challenges, technology changes. Definitely, we've started for the first time ever working from home. The Panama Canal employs 10,000 people, a little over 10,000. Of those, about 1,500 people are able to work from home. And we have implemented that since the pandemic started. But definitely we're looking at technology changes in many more areas. And like somebody said prior to me, I don't know if it was Glenn or the pandemic, what has done has accelerated the technological changes that need to come by different companies and institutions, and definitely has made our life easier and better. We also had, of course, the maritime trade that dropped, like I showed you earlier, but it is picking up, maybe not to the original levels of 2019 at the beginning of the year, but it is picking up. Sanitary and safety was one of the biggest issues. We had to change the way we work with all of the requirements. We, by constitutional title, cannot shut the canal down. So we actually sent home about 50% of our workforce for about 2 months. We stopped all of the dredging works, all of the maintenance projects, all of the investment projects, and we kept only the operational people working. And after that was in May 26th, and on June 8th, we little by little incorporated everybody full work after we had adopted more than 800 facilities, all of our vehicles that move the tug crews, the line handler crews, the pilots. So health and safety put a lot of new pressure on us, and we were able to work it out pretty good. From the 10,000 employees, we had about 500 cases of COVID during this pandemic, and today we have about 59 people still being home recuperating from pandemic. And water, it's one of our main issues right now. We started, if you can see from the chart, 2019, the dotted red line is the average water or rainfall we should accumulate for the lakes. The canal is a freshwater operation. It's a lake on top of the mountains that basically brings ships from the Atlantic to the Pacific going through the mountain range. So we started 2019 with a very dry year. And in the last years, as you can see, we have been below the average. So water is the main challenge the Panama Canal is facing, besides keeping our workforce healthy with the COVID. So this year seems to be a little bit better, but still we're below average year to date. So we're embarking in resolving this problem because we don't want to give draft restrictions to the vessels because then they can come with less cargo and that will be an impact on their economies of scale. So traditionally, we have done draft restrictions to the transit vessels when we have low lake levels. This year, we did something a little bit different. We implemented a tariff for freshwater fee, and we start making water-saving measures. The original locks, because you have two lanes, we kind of replicated what we put in the new locks, which are the water-saving basins that allow you to recycle the water, and you can actually reuse about 60% of a lockage for the next vessel. So we started doing the same in the Panamax locks, and we were able to save between 4 and 6 lockages per day, but that would reduce the capacity because it does slow the transit down. So we actually went down to 28 transits per day in some of the months. That one was due to no demand. And then we forecasted between 30 and 32 vessels per day. Normally we can put up to 38 or 39 vessels per day. But this was to make sure that we were fortunate not to have to give draft restrictions. But we've been analyzing for the last 3 years several projects that will give us a reliability on the freshwater supply for the operation of Gatun Lake. So we've looked at desalination plants. We looked at new reservoirs in the western part of the country, in Trinidad and Rio Indio. We've looked at making earthen dams within the lake to be able to have lake levels higher in some areas to increase the storage capacity. We've also looked at using water that's come from water treatment plants and recycle them back into the lake. And also we looked at a new watershed, an existing watershed that we have on the eastern side of the country and pipe the water through. So after looking at all these projects, they have been looked at a very pre-feasibility level. We have put out a bid for, right now we have put out a request for qualification, and we want to shortlist up to 5 companies on a project that we envision is going to be about $2 billion. And it's a water management system for the Panama Canal. Basically, is to provide a holistic and integrated solution to solve the problem of the quantity and the quality of the water for the Panama Canal Basin. And basically, it's a high-level functional requirement to resolve the water shortage. So we are not depending on climate, but we are resilient to climate. So it's maximize freshwater storage in Gatun Lake, identify alternative sources, because Gatun Lake, the Panama Canal by constitution has a land that is under our jurisdiction. So that's the part A of the project. The part B is to go a little bit beyond, like I showed in the previous map, and have an integrated management control system. So basically, like I said, we have the droughts and we have climate variability. We have increased human consumption. Also, from the Gatun Lake, about 50% of the population of Panama consumes potable water from the lake. So that has been increasing. The lake was built in 1914 when we inaugurated the original locks. And we have a secondary lake, which is Madam Lake, that was built in 1939. So lakes have been fixed a size, transit has increased, and potable consumption has increased. So we definitely do need to find something new. We're looking into a holistic approach. And also the expected outcome is climate smart reliability of transit operations, adaptability and resilience to climate change, guarantee quantity and quality of potable water for human consumption, and digital transformation and real-time data for governance. So the procurement strategy is an EPC contract. Basically, it should be delivered compliant with the functions of the performance criteria. So it's going to be a performance contract. The level of responsibility, the contractor assumes full responsibility for value proposition, engineering, installation, construction, and commissioning of the project. The risk level, the contractor works with the Panama Canal to assure any other alternative, reducing the risk associated with execution, time, and cost, which allows ACP to reduce the risk of the project. The relationship and communication, the project is organized strictly between two parties, the Panama Canal and the contractors. And definitely we will acquire some experts for advice if needed when suitable. Ease of implementation, the EPC methodology is compatible with our procurement regulations of the Panama Canal, and it will be a best value negotiated contract modality, which is used for EPC. Technical and economic weighting is basics for the selection. We have used industry standard practices, preparing for design build projects, ASME request for proposals. We've also done the FIDIC Silver Book, which is an EPC best industry practice for this kind of project, and it's known to everybody. So we put out the request for qualifications on September 7th. Originally, we were gonna receive proposals by November, and due to all the, we did have a pre-bid meeting. There were a lot of questionings, a lot of concerns. So we have extended the date until January 2021 to receive the RFQ and to evaluate and shortlist to 5. Once we have shortlisted to 5 companies, then we'll issue the RFP with a target date of September and an award by October 2021. So with that, I give you an overview of our main challenges during COVID and our future projects. And thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much. The project sounds like a incredibly large project, and I'm sure there was a lot of challenges, but I have met with a number of your colleagues in the past, and I have no doubt that y'all can overcome any of those. And so thank you very much today for presenting and joining us and giving your perspective on the canal.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so let's move on to our next speaker, Luis Moreno, the president and board of directors for Amcham Panama. He's also an associate attorney with a firm in Panama, and Luis is specialized in administrative law, transportation, telecommunications, energy, projects and infrastructure, public procurement, and private-public partnerships. Mr. Moreno has a master's degree in law at Duke University, a master's degree in taxation, plus a master's in business administration for law firms, along with other related specializations. He is also a professor of administrative law at the USMA and served as legal advisor at the Ministry of Public Works of Panama in the drafting of the proclamation of 2019 of the 93 law that created the public-private partnership regime at the Republic of Panama. Luis has been dedicated to the Panama American Chamber of Commerce, where he is now the president, and the board of directors. And he today will be discussing the challenges of the Panamanian regulations that apply to international trade and business opportunities for U.S. suppliers. So thank you so much, Luis, for joining us today.
Thank you, JB. It's a pleasure to join you and all the people that are going to see this record. So good afternoon. Hope everyone is well and staying healthy. Thanks for the opportunity to share with you about changes in regulation that may create opportunities for international trade and U.S. suppliers. Probably the most important or relevant law that was passed recently in Panama is Panama's first public-private partnership law. So I will start with that, and then we'll mention a new regime for multinational companies focused on manufacturing, a modification to an existing multinational company regime, and the latest permanent residency category known as the qualified investor. So time is of the essence, so let's get right to it. There we go. Okay, so we can pass to the second slide, Amparo. Thank you. So Panama adopted its first public-private partnership regime through Law 93 of 2019, regulating the institutional framework and processes for the development of investment projects under the PPP category, seeking to promote the development of infrastructure and public services in the country, contribute to economic growth, employment creation, competitiveness, and to improve the living conditions of the population, which is the ultimate goal of this law. Why a PPP law? Facing fiscal constraints and in some cases technical limitations, Panama anticipates benefiting from this initiative, attracting private sector experience, investment, and financing for the development of important projects. Also, competitiveness. Other countries in the region like Colombia, Chile, Peru, Mexico already have a formal PPP regime since many years ago, and we needed to attract private investment. And one of the important pending issues we had was a formal public-private partnership law. So we also had to, talking about privatization and PPP regime, it was probably the hardest battle we had in the legislative branch, as efforts to pass PPP regimes in the past had failed due to public restrictions, public rejection, and political resistance. The last two governments tried to pass a PPP law, but were not successful. So we had to go through an educational period with the legislators to explain to them how PPP is not privatization. The assets of the projects return to the public contracting entity when the contract is finished. And also the public contracting entity has a very important inspection role through the life of the project. Siguiente, Amparo, por favor. So applicability. With a few exceptions, the law is applicable to the central government, autonomous and semi-autonomous entities of the non-financial public sector, municipalities, and business corporations in which the state has a majority stake. Exclusion, the water authority is excluded from the application of this law. This does not mean that water projects cannot be developed under PPP law. They can, but not through the water authority. Maybe the health ministry or other authorities, but not the water authority per se. The Panama Canal Authority is also, this law does not apply to the Panama Canal Authority, but the Panama Canal Authority has their own PPP law or regulation. The Social Security Agency, national banks, agricultural insurance institute, bank regulators, and national securities commissions are also excluded from the application of this law. So is public safety, health, and educational services. Emphasis on services, not the construction and maintenance of such infrastructures. And other types of concessions for mining are also excluded from the application of this law. So the scope is very broad. You know, you can do a lot of things with the PPP law. It may include design, construction, reparation, financing, expansion, exploitation, operation, maintenance, administration, and or supply of goods or services to the contracting public entity or to the end user of any public service. So it's very broad. Siguiente, Amparo. So we have principles and eligibility factors. Basically, it incorporates strongly, the law incorporates strongly mandatory principles applicable throughout the PPP projects, such as transparency, budgetary capacity, appropriate risk allocation, fair competition, integrity, among others. It also includes eligibility factors that will determine the convenience of implementing a given project through PPP regime. Not everything can be done under the PPP law. These factors include general social analysis, cost-benefit analysis, risk distribution, sustainability and feasibility studies, legal environmental analysis, among others. Siguiente. So this is where we get into the good part, okay, or the thick part of the gravy, let's put it that way. Who are the players in the PPP in Panama? So the owner of the game, the boss of the game is the governing body is called the Ente Rector. It was created consisting of 5 ministers the Minister of the Presidency, Economy and Finance, Public Works, Commerce and Industry, and Foreign Affairs. And in addition, the Comptroller General of the Republic is part of the Ente Rector, but he does not have the right to vote, only the right to participate and to speak. So the Ente Rector is the maximum authority in PPP projects. It is responsible for defining the priority areas of PPP projects and carrying out the analysis criteria on the identification, selection, prioritization of projects, and carrying out approving the requests raised by the contracting public entities to undertake certain projects under the PPP regime, approving rules, guidelines, risk allocation, among others. So then we have the Ppp National Directorate, which acts as a technical and operational support unit for the Ente Rector, for the governing body, preparing for the Ente Rector's approval the selection criteria, the standardization of processes, protocols for collaboration between the various institutions involved in the PPP projects, guidelines for risk allocation, very important, and the design of the scope of work. Then we have the contracting public entity, which is actually the entity that is going to sign the contract on behalf of the government. That can be any of the applicable public entities, let's say the Ministry of Works, the Metro Authority, among others. We have an advisory committee, which is made up of 4 members of the private sector, 2 members of the academic and teaching sector, and 2 members of the organized groups of workers. It raises recommendations and proposes PPP projects to the governing entity, the Ente Rector. And of course, the Ministry of Economy and Finance that plays a huge role in the implementation of PPP projects, as it must coordinate, in accordance with the Budget Classification Manual of Public Expenditure, the methodology that will be applied to assess the impact of PPP projects on the specific public expenditure of the contracting public entity. It is important to mention that the awarded bidder is not going to be the one that signs the contract, but he will constitute an SPV, Panamanian SPV, that will be signing the contract, and the awarded bidder will be the owner of such SPV. Another important thing to mention is that there is a specific purpose trust, which is mandatory in those cases where the project is co-financed. This means that the public contracting entity may undertake financial obligations. If the project is auto-financed, which means that all the income of the project comes directly from the users and not from the public contracting entity, then this specific purpose trust is not required by law. Probably will be required by the financing entities. The next one, please. So the tender process is very straightforward. The tender documents will be made public through a publicly accessed website with sufficient time for its review by the interested parties. The publication of the tender process will include the date of a homologation meeting where all interested parties may discuss the tender documents with the contracting public entity in a direct manner. Also, the publication will include the date, place, and time for the bid proposal submission. Once the contracting public entity receives the proposals from the bidders, it would first verify that all the minimum technical, administrative, and financial requirements established in the tender documents are met. And then it would apply the corresponding quantifiable objective valuation method for the economic proposal, as indicated in the tender documents. So you first have to comply with all the technical, financial, and administrative requirements, and then your economic proposal is compared to the other bidders. The awarded bidder must create then a local special purpose vehicle, as I mentioned before, which is the one that is actually going to sign the agreement, the PPP agreement, the PPP contract, provided with the required capital as indicated in the tender documents, and submit a performance bond. The agreement, the contract, will be entered into effect only after the Comptroller General provides its countersign to the agreement. That's the requirement by law. And of course, there's legal recourses available for bidders that may consider that their rights were not respected during the tender process. Siguiente. So this is more a specific information about the contracts. The maximum term for a PPP agreement is 30 years with a possible extension of up to 10 additional years. All projects must be at least $15 million, except for municipalities, local governments, which is being regulated. But you probably won't see any PPP projects under $15 million. The law classifies.
Que eran, en vez de ser defensas horizontales, eran defensas verticales, cilíndricas, huecas.
Someone is talking about lateral defenses or something like that. There we go. So the law classifies the PPP projects as self-sustaining projects, which I mentioned before, or co-financed projects. Self-sustained is those projects that entirely financed by the fees and tolls paid by the users, and co-financed are those projects that require or potentially will require financial contributions from the contracting public entity. It is worth mentioning that although constitutionally, the Panamanian budget is determined annually by a law approved by the National Assembly, this law requires that all co-financed agreements, PPP agreements, contain the provision that obligates the contracting public entity to include the financial resources program to pay the contractor, the PPP contractor, in the budgets of the next fiscal periods. And also, the law establishes that the Ministry of Economy and Finance will honor the financial obligations acquired by the contracting public entities in PPP agreements, and will prioritize the projects in execution, the PPP projects in execution. So that provides certain safety and security for the bidders and also for the financing parties. Siguiente. We have a dispute resolution mechanism. We have a direct negotiation first, then the creation of a technical panel if an agreement is not reached, and finally an arbitration to deal with any problems arising from the interpretation of the contract, and staying away from the general civil courts, which may take too much time. Other important thing to mention is that the step-in rights. The law includes step-in rights for creditors to replace the PPP contractor in all its rights and obligations under the agreement if the PPP contractor is in breach of its obligations under the agreement. And this is very important because it provides a more secure environment for creditors. Also, the law enables the holding company of the agreement, of the PPP agreement, to transfer the PPP agreement to its right or its rights, the agreement or its rights, previous to the authorization of the ente rector, to a different company, provided that they are not subject to the provisions and disqualifications established by the law. And the law also creates a special pledge in favor of creditors that might be agreed between the holding company of the PPP agreement and its creditors. This special pledge may include the rights of the holding company of the agreement, payments of the contracting public entity to the holding company of the PPP agreement, and in general, all receivables of the holding company. Siguiente. So this is my favorite part here. Why Panama? There's many reasons to make Panama your regional hub for investments and growth in Latin America. Some of them have been explained by my colleagues previously. But it is important to mention that we are a dollarized economy, and we have been since the beginning of the Republic. This is not new to us. We basically, we were born with this. We have probably the most modern and successful international banking center in Latin America, very solid, well-regulated, and characterized by prudent oversight, no systemic shocks or banking failure, continuous technology modernization, stable economic and labor regulations, extensive network for communication with international capital markets, unrestricted transfer of foreign currencies, among other. We have a vibrant economy, consistently low inflation rate, sophisticated communication system, and observance of the territorial principle. Panama has developed a strong democracy over the years. Authority is exercised by the state through three branches of the government: legislative, executive, and judicial, with corresponding checks and balances. This provides for a very stable social and political environment. The same way location is prime in real estate, connectivity is prime in logistics. So connectivity in Panama is unbeatable. Infrastructure-wise, we have international airports, ports on both seas, Pacific and Atlantic, railroads that run through the country, Pacific and Atlantic, and of course the Panama Canal that was previously explained here. Panama's communication infrastructure and systems are at first world country levels and offered in Panama by the world's largest communication companies. Panama has probably the highest level of communication infrastructure in all Central and South America. We have the best access to multiple high bandwidth continental fiber optic networks in telecommunication infrastructure. We are blessed in the sense that we have an extremely low risk of natural disasters that gives Panama telecom sector security and reliability. The cultural influence of the US in Panama is huge. I would say that we are among the top 5 most Americanized countries in the world. We have a great relationship with the United States. It is our biggest commercial partner. And of course, Amcham Panama is by far the biggest binational chamber of commerce and industry in Panama. Finally, people that come to Panama as executives of different companies are happy. The quality of private schools for the kids is at international standards. We have great housing alternatives. It is a safe place to live in, access to health clinics and good hospitals, great foods, markets, shopping malls, golf courses, great diving and surf destinations, beach and mountain resorts, just minutes or an hour away from the capital, general entertainment. I mean, people don't want to leave once they are here. So relevant projects through the PPP regime, the Panamanian government has publicly referred to a pipeline of projects to be developed under the PPP regime, surpassing $2 billion. Among the anticipated projects, the government has mentioned the construction of an 8-kilometer cable car system with 7 stations, transporting up to 3,000 passengers per hour that will cross 6 municipalities and connect with Panama's two existing metro lines. San Miguelito Metro Cable is the name of this project. The construction of a 24-kilometer highway connecting Arraiján and La Chorrera Highway to the neighborhood of Panama Pacifico, which is called the Costanera Highway, and the rehabilitation of a section of the Pan American Highway of around 185 kilometers between the cities of Santiago and David. These are some of the projects that are in the pipeline, let's say, but there's many others. This is a new law. We're starting to implement it, so we'll probably start to see projects next year in 2021. I would also like to mention la siguiente, porfis, Amparo. I also like to mention a recent law that was enacted and is popularly referred to as EMMA, EMMA. This law creates a special regime for the establishment and operation of multinational companies related to manufacturing, which allows multinational companies to establish in Panama and carry out manufacturing, assembly, maintenance activities, among others. These companies can obtain tax benefits of income tax, and as long as they meet certain requirements, they can obtain special visas for their employees, labor benefits, and all the intangible benefits that Panama offers, such as the dollarized economy, connectivity, and others that I mentioned before. Similar to the EMMA law, EMMA law, Panama has, over a decade ago now, a special regime for multinational corporations. This regime is called SEM, S-E-M. We have over 160 different multinational companies in Panama with this regime. This law gives incentives for the creation in Panama of multinational corporations headquarters, whose main activities are the technical, financial, and/or administrative assistance to companies with the same corporate group and the provisions of services to companies of the same group. Under this modality, it is allowed to establish a multinational corporation in Panama with the purpose of having a headquarter that provides support to its affiliates in the region. Now, with the recent modification of this regime, these companies can obtain a license to establish also as a companies related to manufacturing, so they can do both. Currently, as I mentioned before, we have over 160 multinational companies established in Panama with the same license, which have generated more than 7,000 jobs and almost $1.2 billion in investment. And finally, I would like to mention the latest type of visa here in Panama, which is the permanent residence as a qualified investor. The new immigration subcategory called permanent residence was created as a qualified investor, which grants permanent residence in Panama within a period of no more than 30 days. This is really fast. These are just some of the latest changes in regulations that might be attractive to all you guys in Mississippi. Please feel free to contact the American Chamber of Commerce in Panama. We're always happy to help strengthen the relationship between Panama and the USA and to promote commerce between our two countries. Thank you very much. I leave my email and my phone number if you want to reach me for any questions, additional questions. I'll be happy to help you out. Thank you, JB.
Thank you so much, Louis, again, for joining us today and giving your presentation and as well as perspective on Panama and doing business in Panama. And again, I want to mention that to our listeners that will tune into this when we do some editing and post it. I have, as well, I've been to Panama, and I can justify everything that our speakers and panels have said today. Not only is it a beautiful country, but the infrastructure is remarkable, and as well as the opportunities and business climate within the country. So again, I want to thank all of our panelists today. We will be posting each one of your bios along with the recording when we do that. And just again, yeah, thank you for taking the time to present to us today. I know that it's different times, and we're having to adapt and adjust, as several of our speakers have mentioned, to more of a virtual meeting room type of environment, and that's okay. It's something that seems to be working out, and it's definitely more convenient, that's for sure. But anyway, in closing and in wrapping this up, I do want to thank especially again the Panama American Chamber of Commerce and that whole team for helping organize this and putting this together. A special thank you as well to Amparo Rojas. Thank you so much for helping our very own in the trade office, which is Carolina Diaz and Luigi, for putting this together. My team for doing that, and again, this is one of a number of series that we will have focusing on Latin American countries, and I can't think of any better than to focus on Panama.